Aubrey, great to have you in the programme. There will be quite a few people, including, I would imagine, quite a number of TalkTV viewers and listeners, who will be thinking, hold on a second here, do we need to strengthen ties with the EU? Is that something we need to do? Maybe a wee bit worried about this as well. What is Keir Starmer actually doing, Aubrey?
It's certainly quite a bold approach from Kier Starmer here in Washington, D.C., where we all are for the NATO summit to mark the 75th anniversary of the Defence Alliance's founding in the aftermath of the Second World War. And obviously, it is a defence pact. And so Labour coming into office have said that separately they want to negotiate a sort of defence and security deal with Europe. Now, what that looks like is still quite up in the air, but it could be a quite wide-ranging and cover everything from climate change and the environment to illegal migration as well. I think the incoming Labour government would argue that those subjects touch on Britain's defence and security as well, and therefore they might need to be wrapped up in this kind of agreement. Now, what form it takes is still slightly unclear. If it's a treaty, it would take a very, very long time to sort of negotiate. And the UK is due, in fact, to renegotiate aspects of the Brexit deal next year. That was always baked in. Boris Johnson sort of put a timeline on that when he announced the deal. So I think what Labour wants to do is something separate, much more slimmed down, but potentially contentious.
And he's been meeting Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, a one-to-one meeting. What have you heard out of that particular meeting, Aubrey?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think it was the first bilateral that Keir Starmer had when he was at the NATO conference. And he used, or rather Downing Street used, this really interesting form of words, talking about wanting the widest possible cooperation between the UK and Germany. Now, it's no secret that Keir Starmer wants to deepen ties with Europe. In the aftermath of his election, actually last Friday, you had David Lamy, the new Foreign Secretary, embarking on this diplomatic blitz. I think the first country he went to was Germany. He also went to Sweden as well. I think he probably would have gone to France if it hadn't been right in the middle of their election campaign. So it is clearly putting Europe sort of front and centre, this conference. Even though NATO is about the transatlantic organisation and transatlantic cooperation, Europe is actually playing a very big feature here. And in the Oval Office yesterday, we saw how Joe Biden was praising Keir Starmer, saying that he was the knot that tied the sort of transatlantic and European region together.
What about the role of David Lamy in all of this? There were some questions about him being even being appointed Foreign Secretary. He has been appointed Foreign Secretary, but he is in Washington, as are you, with Keir Starmer. John Healey, the Defence Secretary, is there as well. Nick Thomas-Symonds, the European Relations Minister. And some people sort of wondering why Nick Thomas-Symonds is there. But of course, Keir Starmer saying, well, this is actually a really good opportunity to meet our EU counterparts. What do you make of the sort of personnel decisions around this?
It is really interesting, the sort of conspicuous addition of Nick Thomas-Symonds, who might not be known to all or many of your viewers, but he is Labour's new European Relations Minister. Now, he's not the Europe Minister. He doesn't sit in the Foreign Office. He is effectively the European Relations Minister, so in charge of trying to improve relations with Europe. And Keir Starmer's talked about wanting a reset. So really interesting to see him being brought, not just on this trip, but into some of the leadings with the other prime ministers. He was in with the Olaf Scholz meeting as well. So he's clearly being brought sort of front and centre of this. The new Labour government basically argues it would take ages to organise these sorts of meetings. You know, trying to get people sort of out of their home countries and into a room together where they can talk about something is quite a laborious process. But here they've got that really unique and good opportunity. But what's going on behind closed doors, I imagine, is trying to ramp up and sort of lay the ground as much as possible for Labour's work on this Defence and Security Pact, which we think might sort of culminate, or there might be a big development next week when the UK hosts the European Political Community Summit at Blenheim Palace. Again, I should say, organised by the previous government under Rishi Sunak.
And actually, when you're talking about that defence and security aspect, Zelensky is there in Washington as well, and Starmer has met him as well. He's also said that Ukraine can fire Storm Shadow missiles at Russia, and that is a British weapon, so the yet more cooperation and both in rhetoric and practicality here.
Absolutely. I think I can't stress enough how much the incoming Labour government has really wanted to give the impression that nothing has changed and support for Ukraine is completely unwavering. So Keir Starmer very keen to, as you say, meet with President Vladimir Zelensky and give that commitment about the Storm Shadow missiles, which effectively means that he is saying Ukraine can use British-made missiles to fire inside Russian territory if it's for defensive purposes, i.e., taking out weapons systems or infrastructure that is contributing to its ability to wage a war in Ukraine. That was really warmly welcomed by Volodymyr Zelensky and indeed the other NATO leaders here. I think the question coming out of this conference for Keir Starmer still remains, though. He said he wants to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, but he hasn't given a date for it. The previous government set the target as 2030. Keir Starmer has said he's going to set up a review to effectively look at what is needed and how much money they might actually have to spend. But military and sort of foreign office insiders are saying to me, we've done the reviews, we know what's needed, we need to start sort of turning, talk into action. And so that, I think, is probably the biggest problem for him leaving this summit.
Aubrey, I just want to give you the thoughts of one of our texters and perhaps get your view, perhaps not your personal view, but just your analysis really on what Starmer would make of this. Peter has been in touch on text. 87222 is the number with Talking Your Text. Starmer is a globalist in the pocket of the United States who wishes to rejoin the bureaucratic, unelected body of Brussels, whose leaders are being voted out of office everywhere. For the 20th time, Starmer will lead us into a conflict which will be devastating. There are real worries that the sort of global cooperation to do with NATO, to do with Ukraine, to do with the EU, is leading us on a path that a number of people are concerned about, but also 52% of the UK public voted to leave in 2016. How do you think Starmer will sort of assuage those kind of worries from people, or maybe he won't?
Well, he's been quite categorical both sort of before and after the election about no return to joining the European Union, no return to the single market or the customs union or freedom of movement, which I think most people would sort of identify as being the key tenets of membership of or association of the European Union. I suppose there will be an issue about what he wants to do next. If he gets to 2029 and he's still Prime Minister and he wants to run for a second term, there will definitely be pressure from senior figures inside Labour to gradually start deepening those ties more and more and more. And I suppose the question will be, how much is he going to be explicit about his plans for that? At what point do we decide that the sort of once-in-a-generation choice was a generation behind us, and therefore if people wanted to reopen the question of Brexit or rejoining the EU, even if that was possible, we might start addressing that. But it's probably still too far away on the horizon to think that it's any kind of realistic prospect under Keir Starmer.
And Aubrey, just as a final point, President Biden was the person who said that England's victory is all down to Keir Starmer. I don't think that's necessarily the case. You're talking about Starmer getting to 2029, but on Sunday he's hinted that there should be some sort of celebration. Of course, there should be a lot of celebration if England win the Euro 2024, and we should absolutely celebrate that they've got to the final in the first place. But do you think a bank holiday on Monday, perhaps not as world exciting and as important as the 75th anniversary of NATO, but I think to most people, if there's a bank holiday on Monday, that will perhaps mean quite a lot more to them than everything Keir Starmer's in Washington to talk about?
Yeah, it was one of the things that Keir Starmer was asked about earlier today. He had, I think, previously advocated for a bank holiday when the Lionesses were through to the World Cup.
That's right, and in 2020 as well, when England were in the Euros final as well, yeah.
So he certainly basically faced questions about whether or not he might like to stick to his previous pushes on the previous governments. I mean, I can't see Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor, agreeing to a bank holiday, given the amount that...
He's the Prime Minister. He's the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister.
Yeah.
But I don't think he wants to tussle with his Chancellor sort of a week into office.
Just at this exact moment, she'll be worrying about productivity and so on, although I'd imagine there'll be quite a few people taking their own sort of slightly unofficial bank holiday on Monday, no matter what the result. Aubrey, thank you for your analysis. Safe travels. See you back in London soon.